I love podcasts. They're the absolute perfect way to learn or be entertained while you do boring or mundane stuff. And I listen to quite a few podcasts, and I am always recommending specific episodes to my friends. If you're one of my friends, you've probably had me send you an episode and be like, you need to listen to this. So today I want to share my favorites with you. And I will cover my favorite podcasts for your business, for parenting, especially foster and adopting, because that was something I was really looking into, and just general fun stuff, and the podcasts I listened to when I was depressed and I couldn't do much else. Welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm with me, Tara Swiger. Most weeks we talk about what it's really like to run a creative business and how to grow it while staying true to what you really want and yourself and your dreams. This week, a little different, I'm going to share some of my favorite podcasts. I've been listening to podcasts since about 2006. So it has been a long time. When I was writing this episode, I actually went back and I realized that my husband bought me an iPod Shuffle, which had no screen. It was just like very small, for Valentine's Day in 2006. And I'm recording this around Valentine's Day 2019. So it's been a while, but he bought it because I was listening to podcasts on my computer and we only had a desktop at the time. There was no laptop. They were super expensive. And obviously we only had flip phones. That's right, flip phones. Now you know how old I am. Those first podcasts I loved, and you can still go back and listen to them, I think. That's why I'm suggesting them, is Knitcast with Marie Ershad, which may have been the first podcast about knitting. As far as I know, it was. I also listened to Cast On with Brenda Dane, which I do believe is still going in a slightly different format. It inspired me with the direction of my first business, my yarn company, Blonde Chicken Boutique. I actually wrote an article all about that I believe you can find deep in the archives of my site. Did you know my site, taraswiger.com, goes back to 2006? It does. Also, I listened to Crafty Pod with Diane Gilliland, who you can go back and still find the episodes on iTunes. They are so good. I actually stalked Diane on Twitter and we became friends on Twitter, and then we became real life friends and we co-taught classes both online and in person, kind of all over the country together. I took her class on how to podcast years before I actually started this show, but anything good about this show I learned from Diane. So the landscape of podcasts has changed quite a bit since 2006. For starters, you likely know what podcasts are. You probably didn't back in 2006. That's okay. Like, very few people did. Many of you aren't even listening to this show as an audio podcast. You're watching it on YouTube. So hi. When I first started the show back in 2014, I actually had to explain to students and interested people what the podcasts actually were and how to get them. And as I was writing this, I remembered one of my jobs, before I quit my day job in 2007 to 2008, was editing an audio podcast for continuing medical education at the university where I worked. Nobody then knew what podcasts were, but I edited them and I posted them on iTunes, and that's kind of how I got my start thinking it's something anybody could do. So if you're listening to this or you're watching this on my site, taraswiger.com, right now, you may not know you can get it delivered directly to your phone automatically. If you have an iPhone, there is an app already installed on it called the podcast app. You open it up, you search for Explore Your Enthusiasm, you hit subscribe, and then every week, Wednesday morning, 7 a.m., open that app up. My podcast will be there, downloaded, if you've clicked the red subscribe button. So if you use a different kind of phone than an iPhone, search your app store for podcast. You'll find a really basic podcast app. Go in it, search. I am in whatever podcast app you are using. So that is how you can get it delivered automatically. If instead you're on YouTube all the time, did you know you can subscribe on YouTube? And I use the YouTube app on my phone all the time. There's actually a center in the center of your YouTube app. It says subscriptions, and it will update your subscriptions there. So before we get into my favorite podcasts, let's talk about listening to podcasts for a minute. Because the fact of the matter is there are some podcasts I listen to every week, but most shows I tend to save up and then binge on. So I may spend a whole week listening to one show and then not listen again for a month or two. I may completely forget about a show for like 3 or 4 months, and then it becomes one of my absolute favorites and I just go through a whole binge. Some shows I save up for long drives. Some shows I save up for airplane rides. They're just like the perfect kind of navigating an airport audio that I need. So when I am recommending these shows, I'm not just recommending the recent episodes. I might not even heard the most recent episodes, but I know that I've loved the show and it's like I'm subscribed to it now. It's downloading new episodes to my phone because I like it that much. So I am recommending these shows like overall because from all of them, I've learned something or been super entertained or really enjoyed it. And now that I've told you that that's how I listen to podcasts, I want to reassure you that when we meet in person or you hang out with me or you slide into my DMs, you do not need to apologize for not hearing my most recent episode. You should subscribe because that helps other people find the show. But like, it's fine if you haven't listened to the most recent. It's totally fine. Some of you messaged me that you listen every Wednesday morning. And a couple weeks ago when I had the problem and it didn't upload until Thursday morning, I got messages being like, "Are you okay?" I was fine. It was technology. I won't even go into the technology. Basically, the editing software saved the file as an empty file. So when we uploaded it, it wasn't there. So we fixed it. But if you want to hear my best podcast episodes, because maybe you just started listening and you don't realize that I have over 250 podcast episodes, you can go back to episode 234. So I share the most popular episodes of this podcast so far in episode 234. You can find them linked up in the show notes of that episode, which is going to be at tarswiger.com/podcast234. Or if you search for it in iTunes, it says episodes you must listen to is what it's titled. Also, it'll have the number 234. You can click in the show notes of that episode. You can either listen to me describe the episodes or click through and download all of them and hear them. So I've broken these podcasts up into episodes for your business, parenting, mental health, and just general fun stuff. So first of all, my favorite podcast for your business. I'm going to just be honest. I do not listen to a lot of business podcasts regularly because I find they distract me from what I need to be working on. So when I'm in the flow of my own business, or like we talked about a couple weeks ago about the seasons of my business, when I'm in a season of creation, and maintenance, I don't listen to a lot of business podcasts because I just don't need more ideas. I just need to do the work. And listening to a show that like teaches me how to do something new is too distracting. This is actually why I make my show a lot about the mindset stuff so that you can be growing your email list through adjusting your mindset, but still working on your email list and not get distracted because I do an episode about how to rock Instagram stories. Or you can be increasing your frequency on Instagram and still use the same mindset stuff of somebody who's just starting their business or somebody who's in the 10th year of their 6-figure business. I want to make it applicable to all of you through the path of your business, whatever it is, the specific tool thing you're working on. So when I need inspiration or ideas or to learn something, these are the episodes I listen to. These are the shows I listen to. The first one I have to mention is #authentic because I love every last thing about the show. I met the host, Sarah Tasker, when she was a student in my craft your marketing workshop in Manchester, England. So we met in person right away. And then I realized who she was and I was totally blown away. She's an Instagram superstar and she writes an amazing blog to help you with Instagram. Her podcast, #authentic, is an interview show. She also, in the first few episodes, does a lot of lessons about how to improve your Instagram. It is so good. It has amazing interviews. What I love about her interviews is they're not people that are being interviewed everywhere else. If you listen to a bunch of business podcasts, you'll realize that when somebody has a book that comes out, they get interviewed across all these podcasts. Sarah always talks to real people who are really using Instagram, makers, artists, photographers, just Instagram influencers, authors, just a bunch of different people. And her book, #authentic, just released. When you're listening to this, it just now came out. So excited about it. So get her book, listen to her podcast, #authentic. And it's the word hashtag. So spelled out, #authentic. The other podcast I love and I learned so much from is the Goal Digger podcast with Jenna Kutcher. She has a giant business. She started out as a photographer and she went viral on Instagram, and she shares some amazing lessons on this show. She switches back and forth between teaching episodes, which is kind of like what my show normally is, right? Where she's teaching a lesson. And then she switches back and forth between that and with interviews with a really kind of random collection of people. So to be honest, I often skip her interviews and I just listen to her lessons. And the reason is when I've listened to, sometimes she has just randomness. Like she had some reality TV stars on there, like somebody who was the Bachelorette. I'm not really interested in their business, but you might be. And she has a wide circle of friends that she interviews and talks to. And it's interesting in the fact that there's more diversity amongst her guests than most other podcasts, other than Sarah's. And her lessons are like insanely detailed. So she did an episode called, I'll link it up in the show notes, but it's called something like how I quadrupled my Instagram, or the best thing I ever did to grow my Instagram following. And it is so specific and so helpful. She teaches classes on Instagram and Pinterest, and email marketing. So she has episodes leading up to her launches that are about all of those topics at different times. And when I've been focused on those topics at different time in my own business, I've listened to those episodes and learned so much. So if you want a concrete topic on things like growing Instagram, growing Pinterest, growing your email list, tune into the Goal Digger podcast. That's Goal, Goal. Again, these will all be linked up in the show notes too. Now, another one that has a lot of concrete business lessons is Online Marketing Made Easy with Amy Porterfield. I'll be honest, I was like not into the title. It sounds cheesy, but it is insanely useful. So I haven't listened to this show in about a year because I would end up taking such copious notes on every single episode and learning so much. And I have just been in a place of implementing and healing and getting back to my routine in the last year or two. Instead of like learning new things and expanding. It hasn't been a time of expansion. It's been a time of like, well, expanding my family. So my business has been trying to figure out how to put all those things together. But when I need to up level any aspect of my business, I search her archives. You guys know you can do that, right? You go to their show page and you click on more episodes. This is at least how it works in the iPhone podcast app. If you pull down a little, at the top, there'll be a search bar. You can search their episodes. You can also just go to their website and search, and it'll tell you the episode numbers that then you can go download and listen to. So I wanted to mention her podcast because a few years ago, I listened every single week and I acted on so much of her good lessons. That was a year that I think it directly correlated to that being the year that my business hit 6 figures. Now, I didn't buy any of her classes. I applied what I learned from her podcast really studiously. I took notes and then I implemented it in my schedule. Now, another show I absolutely love is Whole Fit Talks. That's whole like holistic, HOL:fit, FIT, Talks with Ange Peterson. She has a multi-million-dollar business. She's one of the top sellers in doTERRA, and she really believes that all of her business success is about mindset. So her episodes are super encouraging and enlightening no matter what business you're in. Her Q&A episodes, she tends to get more questions about her doTERRA business, but her standalone episodes, and they're marked like Q&A or just something else, applies to everybody. So she recently did a really short episode that was like a Instagram Live first called The Quitting Game. And it's about when you're thinking about quitting, what you need to ask yourself. It is like truth. She gives it to you straight up. It's great. She will not let your BS fly. So Whole Fit Talks with Ange Peterson. I also really love All Rise Up with Allison Nichols. So if you have a doTERRA business, you have to be listening to Allison Nichols' podcast, All Rise Up. It is required listening. I recommend individual episodes constantly to people who are just getting started, to people who are up-leveling. If you have a different business, you're going to love her interviews with business owners. And if you have a sales-based business, like if part of your business requires you being a bold salesperson, she's got a lot of great things to say. She's another one of the top sellers in doTERRA, and she's very unapologetic about her ambition and about her work ethic and how hard you need to work to be as successful as she is. She's Australian, so her voice is like very easy to listen to. All you Australians are rolling your eyes at me, but yeah. So for general business, hashtag authentic, goal digger, and online marketing made easy if you do any online marketing. And then Whole Fit is kind of in the middle of like any business, and specifically doTERRA business. And All Rise Up is really, if you have a doTERRA business, it's required listening. If you don't, I don't know if you're going to learn. I don't know. You just want to tune into an episode or two and listen. Now, in each of these sections, I'm going to do honorable mention, where I don't go deep into detail about what the shows are, but I have to mention them. So I used to listen to both the Tim Ferriss Show and School of Greatness with Lewis Howes every single week, but I haven't listened to either of those in a few years. I became tired of the interview format in general. Like, I just didn't want to hear any more interviews. The School of Greatness has a more diverse lineup. I stopped listening to Tim's show because it tended to be all white dudes who have giant like businesses that were started with funding, like investors. And that's just like not my scene. And then like several of the guests are from the intellectual dark web people, and I just like have no time for that. So the other thing about the Tim Ferriss Show and the School of Greatness with Lewis Howes brings up is that a couple years ago, I realized that I was mostly listening to the same kind of dude do a podcast about business. And I realized I wanted to hear from more women. I wanted to diversify who I was listening to. And I've realized recently that I need to diversify beyond what I'm listening to, because although I have increased the women I listen to by quite a bit, as you are going to be able to tell from all of my suggestions, it is now predominantly women. I still need to do more to diversify around race and ethnicity and background. And I know from my own experience that I can only do that if I consciously make the effort to do it. It's not going to just happen, because once you're in a circle surrounded by people like you, or surrounded by a certain type of person, you'll only really be referred to more people like them, right? Like when I listened to the Tim Ferriss Show, I got referred to more and more podcasts like the Tim Ferriss Show. But now that I listen to All Rise Up and The Goal Digger, I find more and more people like them. So in order to diversify, I have to make a conscious effort to. So that's what I've been doing. Now, also honorable mention in the business section is the Life Coach School show, the Life Coach School. Super interesting if you're into like mindset stuff. Sounds Like Bliss with Tara Bliss. It's just a new show that I've been listening to recently. And Manifestation Babe. If the name turns you off, you don't want to listen to it. If you like the name, you'll want to listen to it. Now, then there are two mental health related podcasts that I think are great. I highly recommend. The first is really the first mental health podcast I ever listened to, which is Jen Gotch's Okay Sometimes. I recommend the first few episodes. They're required listening if you think you might be needing to get help with some mental health issues, or you have gotten help with mental health issues. Jen Gotch is the founder of Bando, which means she's a super smart businesswoman. It's an amazing business. You might have seen their designs in Starbucks recently. She has both bipolar disorder and generalized anxiety, and hearing her tell her story of her life and how she came to realize that diagnosis and the steps that she took to get help is really what I needed this last summer, the summer of 2018. I think her show started in the spring. I remember listening to it on a road trip in January or June. And so go back and listen to the first 1 to 5 episodes to get the backstory. Jen Gotch's podcast is actually on a hiatus right now, so it'll be back with season 2, I hope, but I'm not sure. The mental health podcast I'm listening to regularly is The Hilarious World of Depression. So this is a podcast I did not know that I needed, but it is great. So each week the host interviews a different funny person, and they talk about their experiences with depression, how they got treated, and what works for them now. It is always heartwarming. It is sometimes heartbreaking to hear people's stories. And if you are feeling alone with what you're dealing with, I totally recommend this podcast. I particularly liked the episode. The very first episode is with Peter Siegel from the NPR show Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. She also talks to Linda Holmes of NPR Pop Culture, which is one of my honorable mentions later. And he talks to John Green, the author of The Fault in Our Stars and a bunch of other YA novels. And the episode with John Green is amazing. Like, I wanted to write down quotes right and left. So that's The Hilarious World of Depression. Honorable mention in this category of like mental health is Oprah's Super Soul Conversations, which I don't think needs an explanation. It's Oprah. She's got some great guests. She's got some kooky guests. Her conversation with Julia Roberts was really interesting. Now, next section is parenting podcasts. So, the first one that I binge listened to, and she just does seasons of 8 or 9 episodes, and she's just on season 2, but it's the Real Mom podcast. So she's a foster and adoptive mom, and she interviews moms from all backgrounds. So single moms, foster moms, adoptive moms, biological moms, her mom friends, and this show has a very strong aim at Christian moms, but I think all moms can relate to all of the stories and all of the real conversations. I don't listen to really any other mom podcast. Now that I look through my list, this is the one that's specifically for moms, and I super enjoy it. I started listening before we got licensed while we were going through the process of becoming a foster parent, and I found it enlightening. A lot of things they talk about. So another parenting podcast that I love that I send episodes to my friends is Slate's Mom and Dad Are Fighting. So just called Mom and Dad Are Fighting. It's a panel show with 3 parents, usually the same 3 parents, from a diverse set of backgrounds, and they answer listener questions, and then each week they share their own triumphs and fails. They have different aged kids, so sometimes they talk about older kids, sometimes they talk about toddlers. I almost always enjoy it. I mean, I always enjoy it. I don't listen every single week, but I listen regularly. And I usually listen to this while I'm washing the dishes. And I usually listen to this, like I don't have my headphones in when Honey, my foster babe, is home. So I just will like have it playing, and she'll be talking to me or painting, and I'll be washing the dishes. So it's like it doesn't require your total attention the way the business podcast does. The next recommendation is the Empowered Parent podcast. This is a conversation between the 2 hosts, sometimes a third guest. The 2 hosts are certified empowered parent trainers, which means they train people in trauma-informed parenting. It's the shorthand for it is TBRI, trauma-based relational intervention, something like that. And it's about how to parent children who have gone through trauma. So if you're parenting a kid with trauma, or if you're feeling disconnected from your kids, there's a lot of really good foundational lessons about connecting, relating, correcting, and then they will do some episodes where it's like, give me an example. So they'll talk about the foundational core principles and then do examples from them. It's really interesting. And all this TBRI parenting is based on the work of Catherine Purvis. She has a child development research institute in Texas, and she has the book The Connected Child, which I totally recommend. On this show, I mostly just download old episodes and about a specific topic, like toddler tantrums or reunification with your foster child. And I found those super, super helpful, very practical, very hands-on, very aligned with the kind of parent I want to be. Honorable mention is The Adoption Connection. So it's a show with 2 moms. One is she was adopted and she's an adoptive mother, and the other host was a birth mother who put up a child for adoption, and she's an adoptive mother. They both do foster care. Their show's been great. I have only listened to a few, but I really like it. Now, the next section is random podcasts that get me through hard times. So this is just like kind of everything else that's not one of the 3 categories. The first is By the Book. In this podcast, 2 friends read and live by a self-help book for 2 weeks at a time. They choose different kinds of books, and each week they share the results. This is a super professionally produced show, but it's still hilarious and it's warm. It's not just like 2 girlfriends at home. They're like radio people. It's totally like listening to 2 friends. They read a huge percentage of the books they read I've already read, so I love hearing how they actually like break it down into the principles and how to live by those principles. And this is one of those shows that when I'm traveling and I can't sleep, I'll turn it on with my sleep timer because like I'm so just used to their voices. I love them. I want to be their friends. The other podcast, well, there's lots more. So another random podcast that I love is Dear Hank and John. So it's John Green, author of Fault in Our Stars and a million other very good novels, and his brother Hank Green, who's the author of An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. And Hank is the creator and business brains of like a ton of huge YouTube things like Crash Course and SciShow and the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. So if you know any of those, that's Hank Green. So they have a weekly YouTube show that's been around forever, and it's called Vlogbrothers, which is one of the very first things I ever watched on YouTube and like subscribed to. But now they have a podcast where they give dubious advice, as they call it, to listeners' questions. And it's just an audio only show. It's them talking to each other on the phone, giving dubious advice. It's hilarious. It's uplifting. I always feel better. This is one I listen to absolutely every week, usually within the first few days of it coming out, and often when I'm in the car with my foster kiddos. So as we're driving someplace, I listen to Dear Hank and John. Honorable mention, there's going to be a lot here because there's a lot that I have on my phone that I'll like listen to regularly and then not listen to regularly. So I was listening to Layla Sayad's Wise Mystic Woman for conversations about anti-racist work as part of my consciously diversifying the voices I listen to, but she recently changed it up. So you can go back and listen to Wise Mystic Woman, especially her conversation with Catrice Jackson. But now her podcast is called The Good Ancestor Podcast. I just downloaded it. So I haven't listened to that yet, but I like her and her work, and I'm a patron on Patreon, so I'm sure I'm going to like it. Then there are a lot of other shows I listen to now and again, and all of these I've listened to recently. I just went back through my podcast app and saw what I listened to recently. Nerdette, which I love. It's for nerdy girls. Slate's The Waves podcast. Decoder Ring, which is also by Slate, which is crazy amazing. Reading Glasses, which is a reading podcast. It might be the only reading podcast I really listen to really regularly. It's called Reading Glasses, 2 female hosts. Gimlet's Reply All, which is about internet culture. Crazy amazing. NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour, which is like a panel show where they talk about pop culture that week. The Beautiful Writers podcast, which has interviews with writers. Rants and Randomness with Lovey Ajayi. Hilarious. And NPR's Code Switch, which is more like a documentary show, as is Reply All. Those are more shows that are put out by professional podcasting organizations that are more like reported shows than just conversations. So now that I put all those shows in one place, like as I was writing those up, I saw some things that I'd like to change about my own habits. Like I'm very glad that I purposefully shifted to finding more podcasts by women, but I realize there's not a lot of diversity in race or ethnicity or country of origin, so I'd like to change that up a little bit. Basically, they're all Americans with an Australian or two. So this is the year I'll be looking for more This is the year I'll be looking for more diverse voices to listen to, so I would love your suggestions. Tell me, who do you listen to? Who do you love that's different from what I have here? Business podcasts, parenting podcasts, book podcasts, self-care. I listen to just about everything as long as it does not make me feel bad about myself. So if you have a podcast suggestion, please give it to me. If you just love a podcast that I did not mention, tell me that podcast you love. I, of course, know about NPR's This American Life. I didn't mention it, but it was the first podcast anything I ever listened to. But any other podcast suggestion, that's one people always say, send it to me. You can share it with me on Instagram. That's where I hang out the most. Use the hashtag #ExploreYourEnthusiasm or go comment on my most recent Instagram post or tag me. Put it in your own Instagram story so all of your listeners can see it. Just be sure you tag me in that story. I'm at Tara Swiger, and I would absolutely love to hear from you. And if you look down in the show notes, you'll see the link to my Instagram so you can go and comment on my most recent post. Tell me what you listen to and what you love. I want to hear from you. And I am wishing you a week full of enthusiastic listening to shows that make you feel great.